Pompeii nestled peacefully near the beautiful Bay of Naples. It was an old settlement, much older than many realize. Its origins stretch back to the Oscan people. This was around the 8th century BC. They were one of the early Italic tribes. The land here was remarkably fertile. This richness came from the ancient volcano, Mount Vesuvius. At that time, people did not truly understand its dormant threat. They simply saw it as a guardian, a source of good soil. The early town felt the influence of various cultures. Greek sailors explored and traded along this coastline. They established colonies nearby, like Cumae. These vibrant Hellenic communities brought their art, language, and customs. Later, the Etruscans, a powerful civilization from northern Italy, also extended their sway. Pompeii, due to its favorable coastal position, became a small but active port. It was a place where different peoples and ideas met. This mixing bowl of cultures shaped its early identity. For a significant period, the Samnites controlled Pompeii. They were a strong, independent Italic people from the mountains. They expanded their territory to include this coastal region. Rome, meanwhile, was a rising power in Italy. Its influence steadily grew, leading to inevitable conflicts. The Samnite Wars were a series of fierce battles for control. Pompeii found itself embroiled in these regional power struggles. Ultimately, Roman dominance became undeniable. This ushered in a new era for the town. The final Roman takeover was not entirely smooth. In 89 BC, during the Social War, Pompeii chose the losing side. It joined other Italian allies fighting against Rome for greater rights. The Roman general Lucius Cornelius Sulla laid siege to the town. After its surrender, Pompeii was transformed. It became a Roman colony, officially named Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. Roman veterans were granted land there, Latin became the common tongue, and Roman laws were imposed. The town began its journey towards becoming thoroughly Roman. Under the firm hand of Roman administration, Pompeii thrived. It evolved into a prosperous and lively urban center. Many affluent Romans were drawn to its charms. They constructed luxurious villas both in the town and along the coast. These residences served as retreats from the heat and noise of Rome. The region offered a pleasant climate and stunning scenery. The views across the Bay of Naples were particularly admired. Pompeii became a fashionable resort destination. Its inhabitants enjoyed a relatively high standard of living. The town itself was a hive of daily activity. The Forum was its civic, religious, and commercial heart. Here, citizens gathered for markets, legal proceedings, and public speeches. Grand temples stood in honor of Roman deities like Jupiter, Apollo, and Venus. The imperial cult, worshipping the emperor, also had a prominent place. Pompeii boasted 2 theaters for dramatic performances and musical events. Its public bathhouses were sophisticated complexes. They were not just for hygiene, but also for socializing and exercise. Paved streets, lined with shops and workshops, crisscrossed the town. Pompeii's economy was robust and surprisingly diverse. The fertile volcanic soil was the foundation of its agricultural wealth. Vineyards carpeted the slopes of Vesuvius, producing renowned wines. Olive groves yielded oil, a staple of the Mediterranean diet. One of Pompeii's most famous exports was garum. This was a pungent, fermented fish sauce, highly prized throughout the Roman Empire. Within the town, numerous small businesses flourished. Artisans crafted pottery, tools, and textiles. Bakeries produced bread, and taverns served food and wine. Trade connected Pompeii to distant lands. While not a major political capital like Rome itself, Pompeii held considerable significance. It was a vibrant example of a typical Roman provincial town. Its remarkable preservation offers an unparalleled glimpse into Roman daily life. We can see how ordinary people lived, worked, and worshipped. The buildings, art, and even graffiti speak to us across centuries. It was a place of commerce, leisure, and community. It represented a microcosm of the Roman world. This ordinary town was destined for an extraordinary and tragic end. Mount Vesuvius had slumbered for centuries. Its slopes were green and fertile. People farmed there, growing grapes for wine. They did not see it as a terrible danger. Yet the mountain was not entirely silent. Small earth tremors were quite common in the Campania region. Most people were used to them. They thought little of these gentle shudders. Perhaps these tremors became slightly more frequent, or a little stronger in the years before the disaster. But who would connect such common occurrences to the peaceful, vine-clad mountain? It was simply part of life. A much stronger warning came in 62 AD. A powerful earthquake shook Pompeii and the surrounding towns. Many buildings collapsed or were badly damaged. The historian Seneca wrote about this event. He described the destruction and the fear of the people. This earthquake was a major disaster in its own right. We now understand it was a clear sign of the volcano reawakening. Magma was moving deep beneath Vesuvius. This movement caused the ground to shake violently. But the Romans did not possess this geological knowledge. They saw it as a terrible but natural event. The people of Pompeii were resilient. They began to rebuild their city with determination. Temples, homes, and public buildings were repaired or reconstructed. Some restoration work was grander than before. It showed their commitment to their town. However, this rebuilding effort took many years. 17 years later, when Vesuvius finally erupted, some buildings were still under repair. This shows the scale of the 62 AD damage. It also highlights their tragic lack of understanding. They were fixing their homes on the slopes of a volcano that was preparing for a catastrophic outburst. In the years following the big earthquake, other subtle signs may have appeared. Some ancient writers mention springs and wells drying up unexpectedly. Animals might have behaved strangely, sensing changes in the earth. Perhaps there were unusual smells, like sulfur, in the air near the mountain. These small anomalies were likely dismissed, or they were attributed to other causes. Without the scientific understanding of volcanology, these were just isolated puzzles. They were not pieced together to form a picture of impending doom. The whispers of the mountain went largely unheeded by its inhabitants. The summer of 79 AD in Pompeii was probably much like any other. The sun shone brightly over the Bay of Naples. The fields and vineyards were lush and productive. It was August, a time of harvest and agricultural activity. Grapes would have been ripening on the slopes of Vesuvius. Olives would be growing plump on the trees. Life in the town would have followed its usual rhythms. Merchants would be busy in the forum. Farmers would bring their produce to market. The air would be filled with the sounds of a thriving community, unaware of the approaching catastrophe. Daily routines continued as they always had. Citizens would visit the public baths to relax and socialize. Shopkeepers opened their doors for business, selling everything from bread to pottery. Children likely played in the streets and courtyards. Families gathered for meals. Political discussions and local gossip would animate the public spaces. There was no widespread sense of panic or fear. The memory of the 62 AD earthquake was there, certainly, but it had not led to an abandonment of the area. Instead, it led to rebuilding and a return to normalcy. Life was simply too immediate, too real. It is possible that some local festivals were being celebrated or anticipated. August was a month for several Roman holidays. The Vinalia Rustica, a wine festival celebrating the grape harvest, often fell in August. Such events would have added to the lively atmosphere of the town. Preparations for feasts, religious rites, and public entertainments might have been underway. These celebrations would have underscored the sense of community and continuity. Life was proceeding with all its usual joys and preoccupations. The focus was on the bounty of the earth, not its hidden fury. Vesuvius itself was regarded as a benign feature of the landscape. It was often depicted in household shrines called Lararia, alongside Roman gods. These paintings usually showed it covered in grapevines. Bacchus, the god of wine, was sometimes shown on its slopes. This imagery suggests a perception of the mountain as a source of fertility and prosperity. There was no collective memory of it as a destructive volcano. Its long dormancy had erased any fear. People lived in its shadow, trusting its peaceful appearance. This trust would soon be catastrophically betrayed by nature. In the days immediately before the eruption, the earth tremors likely increased. They might have become more noticeable, perhaps stronger than usual. Some ancient accounts, like that of Pliny the Younger, describe these. He was observing from Misenum across the Bay of Naples. He wrote that the tremors had been happening for several days, but people were not overly alarmed because they were so frequent in Campania. Perhaps some wells did indeed fail, or animals showed restlessness. These were the final subtle signals from the stirring giant, yet most people continued with their lives. Pliny the Younger also documented other strange phenomena. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, was a commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum. On the morning of August 24th, a cloud of unusual size and shape appeared over Vesuvius. Pliny described it as looking like an umbrella pine tree. It rose to a great height on a trunk-like column. Then it spread out into branches. Sometimes it was white, sometimes spotted and dirty. This was the beginning of the cataclysmic Plinian eruption. The sea also reportedly became agitated with unusual waves and receding waters. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD, likely began like any other summer day in Pompeii. The sun rose and people started their daily tasks. There might have been no immediate, dramatic signs within the town itself. Then, around midday or early afternoon, the situation changed drastically. A series of loud explosions would have been heard from Vesuvius. The ground would have shaken more violently. The enormous dark column of ash and pumice rapidly ascended into the sky. It began to drift southeast, directly towards Pompeii. This was the moment when ordinary life shattered. Fear must have spread quickly as the sky darkened. Ash and small pumice stones began to fall like a deadly rain. Some people may have tried to seek shelter in their homes. Others, perhaps recalling the earlier earthquake, might have understood the danger better. They may have attempted to flee immediately. However, the speed and scale of the eruption were unprecedented. There was little time to react or make informed decisions. The final hours of Pompeii were marked by growing terror and chaos. The mountain they had trusted had finally revealed its terrible power. The fateful day was August 24th, 79 AD. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the long silence broke. A tremendous explosion ripped through the air. This was the sound of Mount Vesuvius awakening with savage force. The cap of the volcano, which had held back immense pressure, finally gave way. Hot gas, molten rock and pulverized stone were blasted high into the atmosphere. This initial blast was terrifyingly powerful. It sent a shockwave across the entire region of Campania. People must have looked up in stunned disbelief. From the shattered peak of Vesuvius, a colossal column rose. It ascended many miles into the sky, a dark and menacing tower. Pliny the Younger, observing from Misenum across the bay, described its appearance. He said it resembled a giant Mediterranean pine tree. It had a tall, straight trunk of smoke and debris. At its top, it spread out into wide, ominous branches. This was the signature Plinian eruption column. It was a spectacle of terrifying beauty, but it heralded unimaginable destruction for the towns below, including Pompeii. The color of this monstrous cloud shifted constantly. Sometimes it appeared brilliantly white as superheated steam condensed. At other times it was dark and dirty. This was due to the heavy load of ash and volcanic rock it carried. The sheer scale of this eruptive column was unprecedented in living memory. It blotted out the sun, it cast a pall of gloom over the once bright landscape. The air itself began to feel heavy, charged with an unknown threat. The mountain was no longer a picturesque backdrop, it had become an active agent of doom. For the people of Pompeii, located directly downwind, this site was apocalyptic. The initial moments likely involved confusion and disbelief, then sheer terror would have set in. The noise of the continuous explosions from Vesuvius would have been deafening. The ground would have trembled constantly. There was no understanding of what was truly happening. They only knew that their world was suddenly, violently coming apart. The mountain they had lived beside for generations was now determined to destroy them. This was only the beginning of their ordeal. Soon after the gigantic column reached its full height, the deadly fallout began. The prevailing winds carried the vast cloud of volcanic material southeast. This path led directly over Pompeii. What started as a fine dusting of ash quickly intensified. It became a relentless shower of lightweight pumice stones. These stones, some small like gravel, others larger like pebbles, rained down upon the unsuspecting city. They were porous and filled with gas bubbles from the magma. They were not initially scorching hot, but they fell with increasing density. The sky grew progressively darker as the ash and pumice thickened. Within a short time, daylight was almost completely extinguished. A suffocating gloom enveloped Pompeii. Like a perpetual twilight, the air became choked with fine ash particles. These particles made breathing difficult and painful. People would have covered their faces with cloth. The constant patter of falling pumice on rooftops and streets created an eerie, unsettling sound. It was a relentless bombardment from the heavens. Visibility dropped significantly, adding to the confusion and fear. As the hours passed, the accumulation of pumice and ash became a serious problem. The lightweight pumice stones began to pile up in the streets. They gathered in courtyards and on flat roofs. The sheer weight of this material was immense. Wooden roofs, not designed for such loads, began to groan and then collapse. This trapped and killed many who had sought shelter indoors. The falling debris also made escape routes hazardous. Doors became blocked and alleyways filled, turning the city into a perilous trap for its inhabitants. Many Pompeians made the desperate decision to flee. Others chose to hide, hoping the storm would pass. Some might have gathered precious belongings. Others simply ran for their lives with nothing. The choice was a grim one. Staying meant risking burial under collapsing buildings or suffocation. Fleeing meant braving the continuous fall of pumice. They had to navigate streets piled high with debris in near total darkness. The terrifying reality was setting in. Their homes were no longer safe havens, but tombs in the making. As the eruption progressed into the late evening and early morning of August 25th, its nature changed. The mighty Plinian column, which had ejected material high into the stratosphere, began to weaken. It could no longer support its own immense weight. This led to a terrifying new phase: pyroclastic surges and flows. These were superheated, fast-moving avalanches of ash, gas, and rock fragments. They hugged the ground, racing down the slopes of Vesuvius at incredible speeds. They were far deadlier than the falling pumice. The first of these surges may not have directly hit Pompeii with full force. However, they would have devastated areas closer to the volcano, like Herculaneum. They sent clouds of searing ash and toxic gases swirling through the air. The temperature of these surges was hundreds of degrees Celsius. Anyone caught in their path would have been killed instantly. The heat was intense enough to vaporize soft tissues and carbonize wood. These were not survivable events. They represented the volcano's ultimate, inescapable fury, a true inferno unleashed. Eventually, later surges, more powerful and extensive, did reach Pompeii. These torrents of hot ash and gas swept through the city. They poured into every street, every building, every remaining hiding place. The heat was so extreme that it caused thermal shock. People died instantly from the intense heat and the suffocating ash. Their bodies were often preserved in the positions they held at the moment of death. The city was rapidly buried under many feet of this hot volcanic material. It sealed Pompeii and its remaining inhabitants in a deadly embrace. This final phase of the eruption was swift and utterly devastating. There was no escape for those who had remained in Pompeii. The pyroclastic flows were too fast, too hot and too pervasive. They transformed the vibrant city into a silent, ash-covered tomb within hours. The once bustling streets, homes and public spaces were now filled with a thick blanket of volcanic debris. The roar of the volcano eventually subsided, but it left behind a landscape of complete and utter desolation. Pompeii was lost, buried under the wrath of Vesuvius. When the fury of Vesuvius finally subsided, an eerie silence fell. The air, once thick with roaring sounds and falling debris, was now still. A heavy stillness settled over the entire region. Pompeii lay buried, a lost city under a vast grey shroud. The sun, obscured for nearly 2 days, would eventually reappear. It would shine upon a scene of utter desolation. No birds sang, no human voices could be heard. The vibrant town was now a silent, lifeless monument. It was a tomb created by the mountain's awesome power. The world had changed in a terrifyingly short span of time. A thick blanket of volcanic material now covered everything. This layer was composed of ash, pumice, and solidified rock. It smoothed over the familiar shapes of buildings and streets. The city's layout was completely hidden from view. Only the very tops of some taller structures might have poked through, but even these would be indistinct, coated in grey dust. Pompeii was effectively erased from the surface of the earth. It was as if it had never existed for a time. The once bustling port was now a barren, ash-covered wasteland. Nature had reclaimed its territory with brutal efficiency. The layers of volcanic deposit were incredibly deep in places. In some areas, Pompeii was buried under 15 to 20 feet of material. The first layers were primarily pumice stones, light but voluminous. These were followed by denser, heavier layers of fine ash. These ash layers had surged through the city as pyroclastic flows. They settled like concrete, preserving much of what they covered. This deadly sequence ensured the city's unique entombment. It was this very burial that would later allow its rediscovery. The depth of the debris was a testament to the eruption's scale. A truly monumental amount of earth had moved. The landscape around Pompeii was dramatically and irrevocably altered. Familiar hills and valleys were reshaped by the volcanic deposits. The coastline itself was pushed further out to sea. Rivers and streams found their courses blocked or diverted by the ash. The fertile fields and vineyards that once surrounded the city were gone. They were now sterile expanses of grey volcanic desert. The beautiful Bay of Naples looked out onto a scene of devastation. It would take many years for life to return to this blighted land. The immediate aftermath was one of shock and profound change. The region bore the deep scars of Vesuvius's terrible anger. Some people did manage to escape Pompeii in the early stages. They fled before the worst of the ash fall and pyroclastic surges. These survivors would have carried harrowing tales of terror. They likely sought refuge in nearby towns not as badly affected. Places like Naples, Cumae, or Nola might have received them. Their lives, though spared, were forever marked by trauma and loss. They had lost their homes, their possessions, and many loved ones. The challenge of rebuilding their lives would have been immense. They were the lucky few who outran the volcanic tide. Their memories were the first accounts of the disaster. For those who remained in Pompeii, the end was swift and terrible. Many died when roofs collapsed under the weight of pumice. Others were suffocated by the dense, choking ash. The final, deadliest phase brought the pyroclastic surges. These superheated clouds of gas and ash killed instantly. The intense heat caused thermal shock, a sudden lethal exposure. Their bodies were often found in the positions they held at death. Some were huddled together, others seemed to be reaching out. These were the frozen moments of their final, desperate struggle. The city became a vast, silent graveyard for thousands. The fine ash that buried the victims created unique conditions. As the bodies decayed over centuries, they left hollow spaces. These voids perfectly preserved the shape of the deceased. When archaeologists later excavated, they discovered these cavities. By carefully pouring plaster into these empty spaces, they made casts. These casts reveal the final moments of Pompeii's people. We see their forms, their clothing, even expressions of fear. It is a poignant and direct link to the human tragedy. These figures speak volumes about the suddenness of the catastrophe. They are a stark reminder of the lives cut short. In the immediate aftermath, there was no large-scale rescue operation. The scale of the disaster was simply too overwhelming. Pompeii was buried too deeply, too completely. The Roman authorities may have attempted some early exploration. Pliny the Younger mentions that his uncle's body was found days later, but organized efforts to dig out the city were not feasible then. The area was still dangerous with lingering toxic gases, and the sheer volume of material was beyond ancient capabilities. Pompeii was effectively abandoned, left to its silent, buried fate. The lost souls remained undisturbed for many centuries. Pompeii, once a lively and prosperous Roman town, vanished. It was wiped off the map as if it had never been. For a short time, people knew where it had stood, but as years passed, its exact location faded from memory. Other settlements eventually grew over or near the buried site. The thick layers of volcanic debris hid it completely. The name Pompeii became a faint echo from the past, a lost world preserved by the very disaster that destroyed it. Its memory was kept alive only in a few ancient texts. It awaited a rediscovery that would not happen for generations. The eruption's impact extended far beyond Pompeii and Herculaneum. The entire Campania region felt the destructive power of Vesuvius. Other towns and villas were damaged or buried. Stabiae, for instance, was also destroyed by the falling ash. The fertile agricultural lands were rendered barren for years. This was a severe blow to the region's economy. Campania had been a rich source of wine and olive oil. Now its primary asset, the volcanic soil, was a destructive force. The landscape was transformed into a desolate grey expanse. It was a stark contrast to its former verdant beauty. The psychological impact on the survivors must have been profound. Witnessing such a cataclysm would leave deep mental scars. Roman writers like Pliny the Younger recorded the terror. His letters provide one of the few eyewitness accounts. The Roman government under Emperor Titus offered some aid. Measures were taken to support the survivors and the region. Senators were appointed to oversee relief efforts, but the sheer scale of destruction limited what could be done. The event served as a terrifying reminder of nature's power. It was a catastrophe that resonated throughout the Roman Empire. The immediate economic disruption in Campania was significant. Trade routes were interrupted and agricultural production ceased. The loss of Pompeii and Herculaneum meant the loss of key ports. These towns were hubs for local commerce and fishing. Their destruction crippled the regional economic network. Many livelihoods were instantly erased by the volcano's outburst. Rebuilding the infrastructure and restoring agriculture took considerable time. The once thriving area faced a long and difficult recovery. Vesuvius had not just taken lives, it had shattered an economy. The aftermath was a period of hardship and readjustment for many. The immediate surroundings of Mount Vesuvius were utterly transformed. They became a grey, barren wilderness, devoid of all life. The thick layers of ash and pumice smothered the land entirely. Farms, vineyards and orchards simply ceased to exist. This once fertile and bustling region was now silent and still. It was a stark, monochromatic landscape of destruction. The air itself remained hazy with fine dust for many days. The sun struggled to penetrate the lingering volcanic gloom. This immediate desolation would persist for a considerable time. Nature itself seemed to hold its breath after such violence. The survivors of the eruption faced an unimaginable future. Many had lost everything, Their homes, their families, their livelihoods, they became refugees scattered across the wider Campania region. Towns like Naples, Nola and Cumae likely received many. The Roman government under Emperor Titus did provide some assistance. Funds were allocated for relief and officials were sent to help. However, the scale of the loss was immense and deeply personal. Rebuilding lives from scratch was a monumental, painful task. The communities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were shattered forever. Their social fabric was torn apart by the volcano's sudden rage. Over time, very slowly, life began to reclaim the blighted land. Years, even decades, passed before vegetation started to return. Pioneer plants, hardy species, were the first to tentatively appear. They pushed through the thinner layers of ash on the periphery. The volcanic material itself, though initially destructive, was rich. It contained minerals that would eventually create fertile soil once more. But this was a slow process, a gradual healing of the earth. The immediate vicinity of Pompeii remained largely untouched by humans. It was too deeply buried, too stark a reminder of the tragedy. The ground held its secrets, waiting for a distant future. The memory of the lost cities began to fade surprisingly quickly. While the event was a shock, the Roman world was vast and busy. Life moved on in other parts of the empire and even in Campania. New settlements sometimes arose near the devastated areas, but the exact locations of Pompeii and Herculaneum became obscured. The thick blanket of volcanic material disguised them completely. Their names persisted in ancient texts like Pliny's letters, but they transformed into something akin to legendary lost places. They were no longer dots on a map, but stories of disaster. Their physical reality was slipping away from common knowledge. Mount Vesuvius itself was physically altered by the 79 AD eruption. Its profile against the sky was noticeably different. The summit had collapsed, forming a large caldera, a crater-like basin. This feature is now known as Monte Somma. The cone that we currently recognize as Vesuvius formed later within this caldera. The mountain remained an active and feared presence in the landscape. It would continue to smoke and rumble, a constant reminder. The people of Campania had to learn to live with this ongoing threat. They knew now what the mountain was truly capable of achieving. Its quiet periods were always watched with a degree of apprehension. Vesuvius did not fall silent for good after its great outburst. It erupted numerous times in the centuries that followed. Some of these eruptions were significant, causing further damage and fear. Historical records mention notable events in 203 AD, 472 AD, and 512 AD. Each eruption reinforced the volcano's dangerous reputation. Yet people continued to inhabit the surrounding areas. The allure of the fertile land was strong, almost irresistible. They balanced the risk against the rewards of the rich volcanic soil. This precarious relationship with the mountain became a regional characteristic. A cycle of destruction, abandonment, and eventual resettlement occurred. The long-term impact on agriculture was complex and profound. Initially, the land was rendered completely sterile by the ash. However, over many decades, this volcanic material weathered down. It decomposed into exceptionally rich and fertile soil. This process eventually made Campania once again a prime agricultural area. The same volcanic source that caused destruction also brought fertility. Vineyards and orchards flourished anew on Vesuvius's slopes. The wines produced from this volcanic soil gained renown once more. This irony was not lost on those who farmed the land. They understood the dual nature of their majestic, dangerous neighbor. The psychological legacy of the 79 AD eruption endured. While specific memories of Pompeii faded, the fear of Vesuvius did not. Local folklore and traditions likely developed around the volcano. Stories would have been passed down through generations. These tales would warn of the mountain's anger and power. Religious practices might have included attempts to appease the volcano. Living in the shadow of Vesuvius meant accepting a degree of uncertainty which shaped the worldview of the people in this part of Italy. The mountain was both a life-giver and a potential destroyer. This constant awareness became woven into the regional identity. The complete and rapid burial of Pompeii was unique. Unlike cities ruined by war or slow decay, it was sealed. The layers of pumice and ash acted as a protective shroud. They encased buildings, objects, and even people almost instantly. This sudden entombment prevented looting in ancient times. It also shielded the city from the gradual erosion of centuries. The lack of air and moisture helped preserve organic materials. Wood, fabric, and food items survived in remarkable ways. This peculiar fate turned a catastrophe into an archaeological treasure. The city was frozen at a specific moment in time, waiting. For many centuries, the precise location of Pompeii was unknown. Ancient writings, such as those by Pliny the Younger and Tacitus, mentioned it. They described its destruction, confirming its historical existence. However, the landscape had changed so dramatically after 79 AD. The coastline shifted and rivers altered their courses. The thick volcanic deposits obscured all familiar landmarks. People lived and farmed on the land above the buried city. They were entirely unaware of the streets and houses beneath their feet. Pompeii was truly a lost city, its name a whisper from history. It was a ghost sleeping under the fields of Campania. The Roman Empire itself eventually declined and fell. New kingdoms rose and civilizations evolved across Europe. The memory of the specific events of August 79 AD grew dim. Vesuvius remained a known and active volcano, a landmark, but the details of the cities it had destroyed were largely forgotten. Other disasters and historical upheavals captured public attention. The focus of scholars and historians shifted to other periods. Pompeii and Herculaneum lay dormant, their stories untold. They were silent witnesses to a past that had moved on without them. The world above continued its relentless march through time. This long period of obscurity set the stage for future discoveries. The city was not meant to be lost forever. Its remarkable preservation was a secret kept by the earth. The blanket of ash and pumice was a temporary guardian. One day, chance and human curiosity would stumble upon it. The rediscovery would be gradual, almost accidental at first, but it would eventually unveil an unparalleled window into Roman life. The tragedy of Pompeii's end paradoxically ensured its immortality. The world would once again learn its name and its story. But that moment was still many hundreds of years in the future. For many long centuries, Pompeii lay undisturbed beneath the earth. Its existence was almost forgotten, a mere footnote in ancient texts. Then, in the late 16th century, initial discoveries happened by chance. Workers digging a canal in the area stumbled upon ancient walls. They found inscribed stones and painted surfaces. However, these finds were not immediately recognized as the lost city of Pompeii. The true significance remained hidden for a while longer. People in the local area referred to the site as La Divita, the settlement. They sensed something was buried there, but its full identity was unclear. Systematic exploration began much later in the mid-18th century. This was around 1748 during the reign of Charles III, King of Naples. He was keen to enhance his kingdom's prestige. He sponsored excavations at both Pompeii and nearby Herculaneum. Early methods were often quite crude by modern standards. They resembled treasure hunts more than scientific archaeology. Workers tunneled into the buried city. They sought out impressive artworks, statues, and mosaics. These valuable finds were then removed. They were taken to adorn the king's private collection rather than being studied in place. The 19th century brought a more methodical approach to uncovering Pompeii. A key figure in this transformation was Giuseppe Fiorelli. He became the director of excavations in 1863. Fiorelli introduced a more scientific system. He believed in understanding the city as a whole. He wanted to learn about the lives of its people. One of his most famous innovations was the creation of plaster casts. He noticed voids in the hardened ash layers. These were left by decayed bodies. By carefully pouring plaster into these cavities, he preserved the forms of the victims. This provided a poignant human dimension to the tragedy. Archaeological work at Pompeii has continued into the 20th and 21st centuries. It remains one of the world's longest ongoing excavation projects. New areas of the city are still being uncovered. Modern technologies have revolutionized how we study the site. Scientists use advanced imaging techniques to see beneath the surface. DNA analysis helps us learn about the people and animals. Digital reconstructions allow us to visualize Pompeii in its former glory. The site is a dynamic place of research. It constantly yields new information. It deepens our understanding of Roman life and the catastrophic eruption. Pompeii today offers an unparalleled glimpse into the Roman world. It is like a time capsule, frozen at a precise moment. Unlike many other ancient sites, it was not gradually abandoned. It was not built over by successive generations. The sudden burial preserved almost everything. We can walk through its streets, enter its houses, and visit its shops. We see public buildings like temples, theatres, and bathhouses. This completeness allows us to experience a Roman town in a unique way. It feels as if its inhabitants have only just stepped away, leaving their world intact. The site tells us so much about ordinary Roman people. History often focuses on emperors, generals, and famous writers. But Pompeii reveals the lives of everyday individuals. We learn about bakers from their preserved ovens and carbonized loaves of bread. We see taverns where people ate and drank. We explore the homes of wealthy merchants and humble artisans. We find evidence of slaves, women and children. Their belongings, their graffiti, and even their remains paint a vivid picture. They show us their daily routines, their beliefs, their leisure activity. It is a very human and relatable history. The art and architecture of Pompeii are remarkably well preserved. Beautiful frescoes adorn the walls of many houses. These paintings depict mythological scenes, landscapes, and portraits. Intricate mosaics decorate floors, showing incredible craftsmanship. Statues of gods, goddesses, and prominent citizens stood in public spaces. The layout of the town itself is a lesson in Roman urban planning. We can study the design of their homes, from simple apartments to luxurious villas. We see the engineering behind their aqueducts, fountains, and paved roads. This provides invaluable information for historians and archaeologists. Pompeii is now one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. Millions of people visit each year to walk its ancient streets. It serves as a powerful educational resource. It brings the Roman world to life for students and visitors alike. However, this popularity also presents challenges. The site is vast and incredibly fragile. Exposure to the elements and the sheer number of visitors can cause deterioration. Significant effort and resources are dedicated to conservation and preservation. The goal is to protect this unique heritage. It must be safeguarded for future generations to study and appreciate. The most immediate lesson from Pompeii is about nature's formidable power. The eruption of Vesuvius was a devastating reminder of volcanic hazards. It showed how quickly a natural disaster can overwhelm a thriving society. Importantly, Vesuvius is not an extinct volcano. It is merely dormant, and it will erupt again in the future. Modern science helps us understand these risks much better. Volcanologists constantly monitor Vesuvius and other active volcanoes. This knowledge is crucial for preparing communities that live in their shadow. Pompeii teaches us the importance of respecting and preparing for such geological forces. The story of Pompeii also speaks to the fragility of human civilization. The city was a bustling, confident center of Roman life. Its people likely felt secure in their world, yet in a matter of hours their society was completely destroyed. This serves as a profound reminder of impermanence. Things we take for granted can change very suddenly. The suddenness of the catastrophe for the Pompeians is palpable. We see their unfinished meals, their abandoned tools, their final desperate actions. It underscores how quickly normalcy can vanish in the face of overwhelming events. The rediscovery and study of Pompeii highlight the immense value of archaeology. It shows how meticulous investigation can piece together the past. Without the careful work of archaeologists, Pompeii would remain a lost legend. Instead, it provides an incredibly rich source of information. We learn not just about major historical events, we also learn about the intimate details of daily existence. The preservation of Pompeii was an accident of disaster, but its study teaches us the importance of protecting and researching our shared human heritage. Every artifact, every building tells a part of the story. Finally, Pompeii offers a broader reflection on human experience. Amidst the tragedy, we find evidence of human resilience. We see attempts to survive and the instinct to protect loved ones. The efforts of Pliny the Elder to rescue people are a testament to this. In modern times, the dedication to uncover and understand Pompeii shows our desire to connect with the past. It shows our need to learn from it. The city's legacy is not just one of destruction, it is also a powerful testament to a vibrant world that, though lost, continues to speak to us across the centuries. It reminds us of our shared humanity.